The High Commissioner for Human Rights emphasized in a report of 2020 that there's a need for independent, impartial, and effective investigations into the killings. Against this backdrop, we would like to discuss with you today the current human rights situation in the Philippines and the role of the Human Rights Council to address this. Please allow me to introduce our panelists from the Philippines. We have here to my left Mrs. Amelia Santos. She is a widow of a victim of an extrajudicial killing in the war on drugs. Then we have on my right Mrs. Niza Conception. She's the communication head of the Philippine human rights group iDEFEND. And we have online Mr. Carlos Conde, senior researcher from Human Rights Watch Philippines, and Mr. Joel Ariate, researcher and head of the DAHAS monitoring project at the Third World Study Center at the University of the Philippines. After the presentations, we will open the floor for questions. Before we start, please be reminded, for people in the room, when someone is speaking online, you need to use the interpretation earpieces. So I would like to start. Mrs. Santos, could you tell us what it means to seek justice and accountability for the murder of your husband for 7 years?
It was so poor because the government still not having action on this. It seems like no plan for us. That's why I'm here. And I want you to help us to fight for our rights. Thank you.
Want to continue?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
can I?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone in here. I am Ami, a wife, a mother, and now I call myself a human rights defender. I am taking risks to tell this my story publicly despite the fear of reprisal. I have 3 children. My husband is one of the victims of so-called war on drugs in Philippines. We call it tukhang. We're just an ordinary family. We have simple dreams, especially to our children. But not anymore, because my husband died September 21, 2016. In a few days, we will be marking his 7th-year death anniversary. I still cannot forget the pain. I recall the day. It looks like a movie. Armed men came rushing in front of our house. This was a group of police in uniform, some wearing camouflage, some in civilian clothing wearing black and white, some wearing bonnets, some arriving in motorcycles. A few of them wore shirts, Philippine Drug Enforcement Agency initial written on it on the back. They were big, well-built and armed. As they arrived, they began to shoot everywhere in the area. People in the neighborhood were shocked, and they ran into the houses and closed the doors. Right after the shooting incident, funeral comes. Funeral car come, and all the armed men were gone. As we followed to the funeral, I saw my husband lying on a table, his face and body covered with mud and blood. And I look at my children. They were crying, shouting, calling their father Papa. And they were asking me, why? Why, Mama? What happened? After that moment, I knew I needed to be strong. So I took my husband's body so I can prepare his wake. I soon found out that his body bore 28 gunshots. I was in shock and I couldn't believe it. I shouted and I felt anger. I was so desperate this time. I didn't know what to do and keep asking myself, where do they need to do this? Why is killing is easy to do? Who they think they are? They are not God. They don't have the right to kill anyone. They are human, not animals. And from that day, I made a promise to myself, not for me, but for my children. I will not stop until my last breath to seek justice for my husband. And I'm here representing other widows like me and orphans like my children and all the broken families in the Philippines who are suffering with pain in their hearts like me from losing their loved ones who were victims of that so-called war on drugs. The killing are inhuman. I realize that the war on drugs is a war on poor. It's war on the poor because they think they just don't. We are people, we don't have money. We are stupid and they think we can't fight back. They don't know know anything and they don't have ability to defend ourselves in some ways. It isn't true because it's so difficult to be poor. How could we fight for our rights? Because until now, we don't see any action from our government. The killing still continue, just like yesterday. Yesterday, yes, my friend. Namely, Miko Bate, 21 years old, was shot dead by riding in tandem. Yesterday, it hurts to think about that after all the killings, there's no news or plan from the new government or administration for the victims and the families of victims of war on drugs. We continue to hope, we continue to fight, we continue to seek the justice. And what is the big question? Should we expect anything? How will this all end? Who will join us to our fight? Will you help us? Will you help us? We will be able to get justice because if everyone ignoring the murder of our loved ones, what's the plan for a new administration for us? Because we haven't heard anything from them. Even just a small drop of hope, even the new administration, the ICC is only our hope right now. But the government does not want to cooperate. The perpetrators will be punished. It's so sad for us. It's so sad for us who loved ones are victims of war on drugs. We are so hungry. The justice we seek in front of you, in behalf of our families in the Philippines. We are asking that you help us obtain justice and ensure that the war on drugs in the Philippines is not forgotten. Not forgotten. Your support will give us renewed hope, confidence in fighting for the rights of our loved ones. We hope and pray to God that you join us in giving us value, the lives that were killed, all the killed on the war on drugs. I'm sorry. like you, everyone here, we also want to sleep peacefully with a smile on our face, where tomorrow will be happy. And we will, all I have is hopes for our family. Please join us. Please join us to our fights. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Santos, for coming all the way from Manila to Geneva and to share with us your personal feelings about the murder of your husband. And
President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has said publicly that the war on drugs, initiated by his predecessor Rodrigo Duterte, will have a new phase aimed at drug rehabilitation. But recent research by Human Rights Watch, as well as monitoring by other human rights groups, paint a grimmer picture of the situation. On the ground, across the archipelago, drug-related killings have continued. Monitoring by the University of the Philippines Third World Studies Center showed that more than 400 have been killed by both law enforcers and unidentified gunmen since Marcos took office. Many of these killings occurred in provinces outside of the capital region of Metro Manila, which used to be the epicenter of the drug war. Philippine human rights groups have affirmed to Human Rights Watch some of these findings, particularly the increased number of killings in Davao City. The killings here have been regular. The perpetrators often just wear civilian clothes, but they are always in groups, said a staff of a human rights NGO in Davao. It reminds us of the days of the Davao Death Squad, he said. That's how bad it is. A reference to the shadowy group responsible for hundreds of extrajudicial killings in that city that is also being investigated by the International Criminal Court. Several relatives of victims of drug-related killings in the past year recounted to Human Rights Watch in recent interviews how their loved ones were murdered. We had just came from a 7-Eleven store to buy some food that night when about 6 men came to our house, dragged my husband to the second floor where they shot him in the chest, said the wife of a shooting victim in April in Davao City. She said there were more men downstairs. She estimated them to be about 15, including some from the village or the local barangay. And instead of an ambulance, a police mobile patrol unit arrived to retrieve the man's body, even while the armed men were still around, suggesting that the incident was a government operation. Like some of the recent victims of killings in Davao City that Human Rights Watch verified, the victim had had a run-in with authorities who had accused him of theft and small-time drug dealing. In Manila, similar killings perpetrated by men in civilian clothing but acting like law enforcers have likewise been monitored. Also in April, a resident of Caloocan, a city in Metro Manila, had just finished dinner when two men on a motorbike arrived at his house. CCTV footage shows one of the men casually walking inside and came out 5 seconds later and sped away. Inside, the man lay sprawled in a wooden bed, dead, with 4 bullet wounds in the chest. He turned 18 just last February, his sister told Human Rights Watch. Groups such as the Arnold Johnson Kalinga Center, a religious organization that supports relatives of victims, the Children's Legal Rights and Development Center, and the Philippine Human Rights Information Center have also documented cases of drug-related killings under the Marcos administration. Accountability for these killings has not been a priority for either the Duterte administration or this administration. Of the total deaths, estimates range from 6,252 according to official police figures to more than 30,000 according to domestic human rights groups. Only 2 cases have resulted in convictions of the assailants. A vast majority of deaths remain uninvestigated. President Marcos has not rescinded the executive issuances or orders that provide wide authority to the police to conduct anti-drug raids and operations, and that are effectively the legal basis used by the police to try to justify unlawful killings. The Philippine government, including President Marcos, has denounced the International Criminal Court's investigation into possible crimes against humanity related to the drug war killings under Duterte. Marcos is an ally of Duterte, whose daughter serves as his vice president. The Philippine government has vowed not to cooperate with the ICC, but at the same time is doing very little to secure accountability through domestic avenues. Please note that as we speak, there is no UN monitoring of the situation in the Philippines. There is a UN joint program, but that's a technical cooperation program aimed at capacity building, not monitoring the human rights situation in the country. We have urged the UN Human Rights Council to remedy that and to change the mandate of the UN joint program so that it includes a monitoring and reporting component. I will end there, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Conde, for your analysis of the human rights situation in the Philippines with respect to the drug-related killings. We've all heard the urgent call for accountability. Now I'd like to give word to Mr. Ariate. Could you explain to us the data and the statistics of the drug-related killings behind the war on drugs in the Philippines, and what is the current trend?
I think I have a
As
recorded.
of September 7, 2023, 402 persons have been reported to have died in drug-related killings under the administration of Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. During his first year in office, there were 342 fatalities. This is 40 fatalities more than during the last year in office as president of Rodrigo Duterte. Of the 402 fatalities, 164 or 41% were identified in online news reports as pushers or street-level drug peddlers. The next significant category is those we group together under the label unspecified. In most of the online news reports, the main source, if not the only source, is the police that cover the area where the killings occurred. When the police say that they are looking at the drug angle for the motive of the killing, they would often point to the fact that the fatality had been listed in a drug watch list, had been in jail before for drug-related offenses, an associate of a known drug personality or a drug personality, him or herself. A drug personality could be a drug dealer, a drug pusher, a user. In the current count, 135 or 34% of the killings fall within this category. High-profile targets, 45 of them, account for 11% of all fatalities. The Philippine National Police Manual on Anti-Illegal Drugs Operation and Investigation defines high-profile targets as illegal drug personalities, whether local or foreign, involved in the manufacture, importation, exportation, large-scale distribution, transport, or delivery of large quantity of dangerous drugs, controlled precursor and essential chemical substances, laboratory equipment apparatus, maintenance of a drug den, dive or resort, and cultivation of plantation of plant sources of dangerous drugs. The category no known drug ties covers those killed who were considered to be, to the police, to be collateral damage of the war on drugs. Those who were considered to be just in the wrong place at the wrong time. This also includes minors, those below 18 years old, and state agents killed during anti-illegal drug operations or whose death was linked to his or her anti-illegal drugs work. There are 34 killings in this category, or 8% of all the casualties. 24 or 6% of those killed were drug users. When they were killed, they were found to be in possession of illegal drugs, often shabu or methamphetamine hydrochloride, which by its amount is determined to be for personal use. The fatalities are mainly young men in their 30s. Most of the victims of reported drug-related killings are male, or 358 out of the 402 fatalities, or 89%. There were 38 female casualties, or 9% of the current total count. The reports on the 6 remaining deaths didn't mention their sex. The age group with the largest number of fatalities were those in their 30s at 87 or 22%, followed by those in their 20s with 64 or 16%, 40s with 54 or 13%, those in their 50s with 23 or 6%, and 2 in their 60s. There were 11 fatalities aged 19 and below, 5 of whom were minors, 2 17-year-olds, 2 15-year-olds, and 1 6-year-old. Of the 402 fatalities to date, 182 or 45% died in the hands of state agents in reported anti-illegal drugs operations. This is 5% lower than in the last year of the Duterte administration. If there's a reduction in the killings committed mainly by the police, this also means there is an increase in cases that are more likely to be vigilante killings. In an identified category, 129 or 32% of deaths are listed. By unidentified, we mean those killings with witnesses or were captured by cameras, but the true identity of the assailants were not known since they were not arrested. 51 or 13% were identified as non-state agents. They were positively identified by witnesses. The remaining 40 or 10% of the killings were committed by unknown assailants. Rather than categorize these killings as perpetrated by unidentified assailants, we mark them as unknown assailants since there were no witnesses to the killings. Often, these are cases of body dumps. The killings were done elsewhere, and the bodies of those killed were usually thrown at the side of roads and highways. Some of the bodies bear placards or other markings indicative of torture, identifying the victim as either a drug user or a street-level drug peddler. Unlike the 30s time, with most of the reported drug-related killings centered in the National Capital Region or in Metro Manila, a new hotspot has emerged in the Marcos administration, Davao City. Davao City, for decades, has been a stronghold of the Dutertes. The data that I've just presented came from the DAHAS PH project of the Third World Study Center of the College of Social Sciences and Philosophy, University of the Philippines, Diliman. The DAHAS PH project, or DAHAS for short, is a running count of the reported drug-related killings in the Philippines that I started in March of 2021 with 2 other colleagues from our research center. DAHAS is Filipino for violence. To date, it is the only initiative in the Philippines that continues to keep track of the killings in a drug war that during its most violent phase from 2016 until 2018 saw thousands die each year. DAHAS gathers its data from news accounts online posted by various media organizations in the country and occasionally from social media posts of police units and other state actors touting their accomplishment of having, quote, neutralized, unquote, a known player in the illegal drug trade in their area. News accounts as data are processed in 3 interrelated manners. DAHAS maintains an internal database where the information about those killed in drug war are kept. Their names, date of death, place of death, manner of death, demographic data, among others, are some of the key data points in this database. The news accounts also became part of an online public list of sources that documents the instances of killings related to the war on illegal drugs. And lastly, the news accounts serve as the basis for the weekly and monthly tallies of those killed in the drug war presented in the social media, mainly through X, formerly Twitter, but also in Facebook, Instagram, and Threads, and the occasional report that we write in the online independent news outlet, Vira Files, that has social media posts come with the data visualized mainly to show where the killings happened and which provinces have the most kills. Since the beginning of the Marcos administration, we have also started an annual report that we intend to release for each year that Marcos is in office. The DAHAS key objective is to provide robust documentation of reported drug-related killings as the Duterte presidency handed its power to the current Marcos administration and answer one key question: will there be change in the lethal intensity of violence that the Philippine government heaps on its own people through its drug war? A year into the Marcos presidency, and the numbers point to a disconcerting answer: no.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ariate, for your excellent presentation. I think your data results really draw a clear picture of the continued severity of the situation and that the drug war has not ended. I would like to give word to our last speaker, Mrs. Conception. Miss Conception, apologize. What efforts has the UN Human Rights Council taken up so far to address the human rights situation in the Philippines, and what does it need in the future?
Thank you, Astrud. So in 2019, with the resolution, the Human Rights Council requested the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights to conduct an inquiry into the Philippines over its alleged extrajudicial killings under the war on drugs. In June 2020, the High Commissioner for Human Rights issued a report to the Human Rights Council regarding the situation in the Philippines, which found serious and systematic violation of human rights, including summary killings, arbitrary detention, and suppression of dissent in the context of countering national security threats and illegal drugs. The High Commission's report recommended legislative and policy reforms aimed at ending Project Tokhang and mandatory penalties for drug offenses, as well as decriminalization and adoption of rights-based alternatives to incarceration. The recommendations also urged for adequate assistance to families of victims of drug-related killings, including financial aid, legal support, and psychosocial services. In response, the Human Rights Council Resolution 45/33 in October 2020 resulted in a joint program for capacity building and technical cooperation, or the UNJP. Technical cooperation is part of the recommendations, but it does not encompass the entirety of the High Commissioner's recommendations. Critical mandates are missing, and the program only has a 3-year term. The joint program is ending next year, but it has yet to deliver on a crucial goal, addressing impunity. We have presented in the Human Rights Council cases of unrelenting extrajudicial killings, unabated attacks on human rights defenders, diminished civic spaces, and suppression of dissent, as if the High Commissioner's report did not exist. The National Police Commission Memorandum Circular, which launched Operation Double Barrel, the Interior and Local Government Circulars, which created surveillance and profiling system in the communities, the Securities and Exchange Commission Circular, which compelled NGOs to disclose their partners in the local areas, and the anti-terrorism law, all continue to undermine efforts to defend human rights and strengthen democratic spaces. On the other hand, legislation relevant to the goals of accountability have yet to be certified as priorities by the Office of the President. These include the Human Rights Defenders Protection Bill, ratification of the Convention on the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances, the National Preventive Mechanism on Torture, the Charter of the Commission on Human Rights, legislation to penalize terrorist and red tagging, and to penalize extrajudicial killings, and a review of the anti-terrorism law. So at this time that the government in the Philippines is regaining its good image and relations with the international community, impressions are made that the human rights situation is improving. It is not. This must be corroborated with the follow-up to the High Commissioner's report. The Human Rights Council has a standing obligation to continue to monitor and report on the Philippine situation by virtue of the resolution. A new resolution to report out to the Human Rights Council the improvements in the human rights situation is essential in pursuing accountability and ending impunity in our country. A new resolution to mandate an assessment of the human rights situation, including the impact of the UNJP, is a critical requirement. Despite its limitations, the UNJP consists of the only platform by which human rights civil society organizations can directly engage government officials. All other spaces and engagement opportunities have been obliterated by the past administration. However, the program needs to be configured to enable it to confront serious rights violations still happening on the ground and enforce accountability accordingly. With its current mandate, it only expects to conclude with an internal project report. The program risks closing without scoring any mark on ending impunity. But understanding that systemic barriers to accountability and justice cannot be addressed in the short term, nevertheless, a solid direction is vital. But this needs a consistent resolve and commitment from the international community and all stakeholders in human rights protection. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Conception, for explaining to us the civil society perspective of the implementation of the UNJP and for reiterating the call for accountability measures taken up by the Human Rights Council. I would like to give the audience now the opportunity to ask questions. I will take a couple of questions at a time, and please do introduce yourself before you speak and keep your questions brief, and turn off your microphone again after speaking.
வணக்கம் Madam Amelia. I'm from Sri Lanka. அங்கேயும் I speak Tamil. அங்கேயும் போரால நாங்கள் பாதிக்கப்பட்டாக்களா இங்கே சமூகம் அளிச்சிருக்கிறோம்.
I'm from Sri Lanka and I'm here as a witness of war in Sri Lanka.
Yeah. நீங்க ட்ரக்ஸ்ல நடந்த பிரச்சனைகளை இங்க கூறுறதுக்காக வந்திருக்கிறீங்க. அது ஒரு பெரிய விஷயம் இங்க நீங்க வந்து இதை கதைக்கிறது.
You have come here to witness also, to give your testimony about your plight about the drugs dealing, drugs concerning the drugs extrajudicial killing.
இந்த அவையை நம்பி நீங்க இங்க வந்து இந்த பிரச்சனையை சொல்றது மிகவும் ஒரு நல்ல விடயமா நாங்கள் பார்க்கிறோம். என்னடா நாங்களும் தொடர்ந்து இந்த பிரச்சனையை இந்த அவையில சொல்றக்காண்டி தொடர்ந்து வந்து கொண்டிருக்கிறோம்.
It's very touching when you speak about your faith, your fate, and it's important that you engage also with this council, because we also, even if it's difficult, we come here regularly to give witness.
நாங்கள் சொல்லி கொண்டிருக்கிறோம். ஆனால் இதை பார்க்க எங்களுக்கு நடக்கிறது அவங்களோட கிடைக்கிறது கொஞ்சம் தாமதமாக இருந்தாலும் நாங்கள் எங்களோட பிரச்சனையை நம்பிக்கையோடு சொல்லி கொண்டிருக்கிறோம் இந்த அவையில்.
Even if it's the system is very complicated for the victims to have justice immediately, we have to master it, and we have no choice, and you have to keep faith in the system.
உங்களோட உறவுகள் மாதிரி நாங்களும் 1,00,000க்கு மேற்பட்ட உறவுகளோட உயிரை இழந்திருக்கிறோம்.
As for your loved ones, we also have lost our loved ones, more than 1,000 people approximately.
எங்களுக்கும் நீதி கிடைக்கும் என்ற நம்பிக்கையோட நாங்க இந்த அவையில வந்து கதைச்சு கொண்டிருக்கிறோம். உங்களுக்கும் நீதி கிடைக்கணும் என்று நாங்கள் கேட்டுக்கொள்றோம். நாங்கள் உங்களோட இணைஞ்சு உங்களுக்கு ஆறுதலா எப்பவும் இருப்போம் என்ற நம்பிக்கை உங்களுக்கு தரோம்.
You are here for your to get justice for you and the victims. We also do the same, and we assure you that we will support you in your fight, and you can have our international solidarity.
Thank you. Could you turn off the microphone? Thank you. I will collect another 2 questions, and then we'll give the panelists time to respond or to make remarks. Are there other questions in the room? Yes, please.
Jose Victor Lubrigo from the Justice and Peace of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines. Considering that nothing happened on the ground for redress of the abuses of human rights, And yet, the UN Human Rights Council, through the help of so many diplomatic countries, supported the joint program in the Philippines, supposedly to address the problem. What do we demand from them? Because they become complicit to the issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there another question in the room? Okay, then I will give the panelists the chance to speak again. Would you like to give a response, Amelia, or is it okay?
The questions that we had.
Just if you want to give another remark or response.
Yes.
Yes?
What country?
Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka. First, thank you so much for the supporting Sri Lanka. Thank you so much. I would like everyone here to support us. So please support us. And we were hoping soon that the justice will serve on us. Because in the Philippines, obviously, they are not interested like us. Our loved ones lost in extrajudicial killing. They are not interested. They don't have any plan. We heard the ICC wants to help us, but our government doesn't cooperate. That's why everyone here, please support us to continue and hoping soon the justice will be served on us. Not only me, again, to the family in the Philippines, the orphans, the broken families there, still seeking and waiting for the justice that we will seek for. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes, Puri.
So the question is not from me, but the question is from online. So there's a question from Edil Guyano from Caritas Philippines. How can the UN Human Rights Council demand accountability when alleged government insists that justice is still working in the country? What UN Human Rights Council extends aid to the victims? He doesn't specify to whom the question is addressed.
Thank you, Puri. Ms. Niza, would you like to respond? And then I'll give word to Mr. Conde and Arya.
Thank you, Astrud. Well, we realize that the Philippine government has been undertaking international missions and massive propaganda about the improving human rights situation in the Philippines. We think it would be in everybody's interest to conduct an overall assessment as a follow-up to the High Commissioner's report. It would collaborate and validate what the government is saying about the situation that has improved. And we will also have the chance to put the data against the government pronouncement and government findings. That's why we are requesting the Human Rights Council to come up again with a resolution. First of all, to conduct that assessment, because you don't really come up with a program and then just close it, right? It's a basic project operation to have an evaluation whether it really addressed the problem it was supposed to solve or address, no? And we remain very active in the UN Joint Program in the Philippines. We sit in the technical working groups. Every technical working group has a CSO representative, but within the program itself, there are serious limitations that we would really like to engage more to improve we think we can do it with a new mandate and an extended term. So I think that's one of the approaches that we can do as part of the Human Rights Council response.
Thank you. And if Mr. Conde would like to give some more remarks, please.
Thank you. This is in regard to the question about the UNJP and what the role of the member states of the Human Rights Council and particularly the donors to the UNJP in all of this. It is, I think, extremely important for member states and the donors to press, to demand on the Philippine government to have a more significant and really serious participation and engagement in how the UNJP is being enforced in the Philippines. As you know, the UNJP actually started poorly. It's going to end in July, but it actually spent a lot of their time just trying to set up the technical working groups and set up the structure. And of course, COVID, the pandemic did not help, but they still have a lot of work to do. And that's why we believe it should be extended, but it cannot be extended as is. It has to have monitoring and reporting capabilities. The mandate needs to be extended. The mandate needs to be expanded. And this is where member states of the Human Rights Council can really come in. They should really pressure the Philippine government to really cooperate fully with the UNJP, with the many efforts to investigate what's happening in the Philippines. Because unless the government is serious about the UNJP and what it tries to do, it's going to be just for show. It's going to be just a program that the Philippine government can use for propaganda purposes, but has little impact on the ground in terms of improving the human rights, the persistent human rights problems in the country, unless the donor countries, the member states, would expand and strengthen the mandate of the UNJP.
Thank you, Mr. Conde. I'm not sure if Mr. Ariate would also like to give some thorough remarks, even though the questions were not targeted him. But yes, please.
No, I have nothing to add.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions in the room? Yes, please.
This time is from me. I'm Budi from Franciscan International. My question is to Mr. Joel Ariate regarding the research that you've been doing, in particular in the first year of Marcos' administration. From your research, you presented the fact that now there is a shift of the drug-related killings to take place much more in Davao region instead of Metro Manila. Will you be able to provide some analysis why there is this tendency now in comparison with the previous administration? Thank you.
Please, Mr. Ariate.
Yes, thank you for the question. To provide an analysis would, I think, in a way, be beyond the remit of the data gathering that we're doing, but we can, at the very least, hypothesize something on why the shift. I think the main reason would be Davao City in the southern island of Mindanao is quite far from the mainstream media or the preoccupation of the mainstream media, which most of which are centered in Manila. So when there are a series of killings almost every week, once a week since the start of the Marcos administration, and almost all of those killed were killed by policemen, supposedly during buy-bust operations, anti-illegal drugs operations. So in that sense, I mean, given the supposed alliance between the Duterte and the Marcoses, then what appears is that it's a way for the Dutertes actually, since they control the area, one of the sons of the former president is the mayor of the Davao City with direct responsibility when it comes to policing the area, then we can say that it's also a way of flexing its muscle in the alliance with Marcos, actually. That even though Marcos is saying one thing, then they were doing another. It's a leverage in the political game. That's what we can see at the moment. So those two things, there's the apparent distance from the national media, and hardly any of those killings were reported in the traditional press, for example. And of course, the political context of all this killing, this alliance between Marcos and Duterte.
Mr. Ariate, I saw that Mr. Conde raised his hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. And just to add to what Professor Joel said about what's happening in Davao City, I think it's important to keep in mind the larger context of why that city is now the epicenter of the drug war. For decades, Davao City has been the laboratory of violence in the Philippines. Perhaps no other city in the Philippines has had that infamy, for lack of a better word. This is the city where the Davao Death Squad emanated in the late 1990s and 2000s during the time of President Duterte as mayor. This is where he started a method of extrajudicial killing to go after criminals, suspected criminals, and suspected drug users to supposedly try to cleanse the city. This is where he perfected this campaign, this program that he later on expanded nationwide, beginning 2016. The same method, the same modus operandi that has happened in Davao City. Expanded nationwide, and you would think that by now it should have been over, but no. In fact, in our own research in Davao City recently, we're finding the same patterns occurring again in Davao City. As I mentioned in my earlier presentation about one of the respondents to the interviews, they're saying that it is like the Davao Death Squad all over again in Davao City. And this is unlike what we see or what witnesses have told us what's happening in Davao City, is that this is not like the Tokhang in Manila, for instance, in 2016, where armed and uniformed police officers who conduct raids. No, that's not the case in Davao City. These are men wearing civilian clothes. But men who are clearly working for the government, for the local government, for the barangay, who are conducting these raids, often in groups, and killing these people. Now, it's hard at this point to pinpoint exactly what unit of the police that is doing this, but it's very clear that according to the witnesses that we talked to, it is very clear that the government is involved in the operation. So this is again Davao Death Squad all over again. This is the kind of program that they did in Davao City, and also they did in many other places. In fact, in Mindanao, such as Tagum City, which is near Davao, and several other cities. So, this is going back to what makes this comfortable for the Dutertes. And it's really, I think, part of the explanation why it is happening there right now in such intensity.
Thank you, Mr. Conde. Are there any further questions here in the room? Any questions online? Otherwise, we have about roughly 5 minutes left, and I would like to give the floor to our panelists again to make some final remarks. I don't know, do you want to speak again or otherwise? Oh, okay. Maybe Ms. Niza, do you want to give some final remarks?
Yes, thank you for making some time to come to our side event. I would just like to give an example of how lacking in the framework of accountability the UN Joint Program is. There had been a dismissal of more than 2,000 police police personnel and officials reported by the government, no, because of their involvement in drug-related operations, which resulted in extrajudicial killings. These dismissals only involve firing from the police force, demotion, reprimand, and had their salaries forfeited, or they are deprived of certain privileges. Until now, that was a report in 2019, until now, no criminal prosecutions are happening. So that is one aspect or one sliver of accountability measure that we are looking at, that we still don't have any, concrete approach. No, we cannot see how the government is doing with these investigations and prosecution. So at least in that aspect, on investigating police perpetrated extrajudicial killings, at least we would like to see more concrete and stronger measures towards prosecution. Until now, we only have 2 convictions of murder in two cases since 2016, since the report of the High Commissioner, and there's no more progress on that. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ariate, would you like to give some final remarks?
My only call to the people attending the conference today is that for them to look at the data. The reports from the ground is enough justification to really provide a critical look on the Philippines and how the human rights situation when it comes to the war on drugs and drug-related killings has not improved in any way from the last 2-3 years of the Duterte administration. Look at the data. We're providing the data publicly. You can scrutinize the news reports that are the sources of those tweets, of those Instagram stories that we post. It's there. So use it, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Ariate. Mr. Conde, any further last remarks?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. I mean, the final thought is that on the UNJP, it still can make some difference, but it really needs the government to be serious about it. It needs to stop throwing stumbling blocks at it. It needs to be consistent about the image that it's trying to show to the international community, that it is rights respecting, that things have improved, and yet you have this dissonance where apart from the continued killings, you have officials, high public officials, still behaving the same way. In the Philippines, red tagging has actually worsened. I mean, I'm not saying that because Human Rights Watch has been finally, unfortunately, has been red tagged, but no less than the chairman of the UNJP himself, Justice Secretary Crispin Rimulya. I mean, how is that consistent with what the UNJP tries to do to promote human rights when your top justice official is red tagging civil society organizations? How is this UNJP supported by all of these members country? How is this consistent with the fact that a lot of journalists, a lot of activists are still being targeted by spurious charges, being accused as terrorists, being held to court for their for expressing dissent? A lot of inconsistencies. So again, the donor countries, the Human Rights Council members, they need to urge or pressure the Philippine government to get its act together to make the UNJP work. Because we have to keep in mind, there is no UN monitoring in the Philippines, and about the only thing that many of us in civil society organizations are holding on to is the UNJP for some semblance of improvement. Of course, there's the ICC, but it carries a lot of political risks for a lot of people, so that's why it's not moving. But really, donor countries of the UNJP, look where your money is being spent. Is it being spent, wisely? Is it going to what it is intended to be spent on? Is it really making a difference in making sure that capability and capacity of the Philippine government to investigate killings and improve its democratic institutions are working. They need to have that, I would say, accountability within the UNJP, because otherwise, again, as I pointed out earlier, it will just be for show. If the the UNJP ends with nothing to show for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Conde. Thank you, everyone, for participating. We will end the session now. Special thanks to our panelists and especially to Mrs. Santos for sharing her personal experience here. What is clear today is that the human rights situation in the Philippines is dire and that there is a strong and continuous call for accountability and a need to use the UNJP to address this. But it also needs further actions from the international community and the Human Rights Council. Thank you very much, and if you'd like, we will be outside of the room for further discussions. Thank you.